Biden has failed to enforce our immigration laws and secure our southern border. The crisis he created has unleashed devastating consequences across the nation. The White House continues to prioritize progressive ideology over public safety, and their policies allow dangerous criminals to illegally cross into the United States and freely roam our streets. Bad actors are emboldened, knowing the U.S. government will do nothing to remove them from the country. The reality of illegal offenders being repeatedly released into our communities after committing more crimes isn't conjecture. We've witnessed the tragic fallout. In Georgia, we just saw a young woman's future senselessly stolen. Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student, was brutally murdered while jogging on the campus of the University of Georgia. The person charged with her murder entered the United States illegally in 2022 and was paroled and released into the country by the Biden administration. This man went on to commit crimes in both New York and Georgia before his path fatally crossed with Laken Riley's. Enough is enough. The situation was preventable. No family should ever have to endure this type of pain, and we must do everything possible to keep Americans safe. That's why we're taking up H.R. 7511, the Laken Riley Act. This measure will require the Department of Homeland Security issue a detainer and take into custody aliens who commit burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting. It also gives states the authority to bring civil cases against the federal government for failure to enforce immigration laws. Together, these authorities will help ensure that what happened to Laken Riley will not happen to anyone else in the future. We're also here to consider H.R. 2799, the Expanding Access to Capital Act. Biden-era bureaucrats have increasingly imposed red tape and regulatory hurdles on small businesses and job creators. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, has demonstrated that both through its imposition of unnecessary mandates and neglect of capital formation. Capital formation is critical in creating long-term sustainable economic growth. Sadly, instead of making sure that small businesses and entrepreneurs of tomorrow can access capital markets, the SEC has wasted time focusing on requiring public companies to disclose immaterial and irrelevant information. H.R. 2799 will change this state of affairs. By encouraging opportunity and right-sizing regulatory barriers, the bill will help small businesses and entrepreneurs access capital, reduce costs for issuers and for investors, make it more attractive for companies to go public and stay public, and improve investor choice. It will drive American economic growth and prosperity now and into the future. I'll now yield to our ranking member, my very good friend, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we are here at the Rules Committee, not to fund the government, not to help people facing crisis here or abroad, not to consider any real solutions, but to consider two more MAGA messaging bills. First, we have H.R. 2799, which should be renamed the Expanding Access to Fraud Act. This bill weakens protections for Main Street investors. To be clear, when transparency, accountability, and legal requirements are removed, fraud and abuse can run rampant. This measure is just a grab bag of bad bills that collectively attack critical safeguards. It will explicitly help wealthy hedge fund managers and private equity firms while raising costs on the very small businesses this bill claims to help. Give me a break. Then we have H.R. 7511, the Laken Riley Act. Let me be clear. What happened to Laken Riley is an awful tragedy, a 22-year-old nursing student. My own daughter's 22 years old. Laken had her whole life ahead of her, and the person responsible should go to jail for the rest of their lives. And I'm sending my prayers to Laken's family and loved ones during this difficult time. But I have to say, I am appalled that we have people in Congress and on this committee who are using such a horrible crime to score political points. It's beyond the pale. We're here because Donald Trump demanded you make the border an issue. We're here because you want to try and campaign off this terrible tragedy and tell people that Democrats somehow support killers. Maybe instead you should tell them how Republicans killed a bipartisan border deal that could have actually done something. And by the way, since you're all so passionate about politicizing this tragedy, can you please show some compassion for the weekly mass shootings we have in this country? We had a shooting in Uvalde. We heard silence from the other side. We had a shooting in El Paso, silence on the other side. It's our job to actually do something about these tragedies. So can you please just be consistent? We should have worked together here to address this tragedy, just like we should work together to address gun violence. But instead, all we get is one MAGA messaging bill after another. You literally introduced this bill a week after Lakin's murder. No hearings, no markup, nothing. The claim that this bill is being brought forward because Republicans care about securing the border when they tanked one of the toughest bipartisan border bills ever is an insult to the American people's intelligence. This is just a totally cynical and disgusting attempt to exploit this tragedy to score cheap political points in an election year. This bill, let's be clear, this bill will do nothing to solve any of the problems at the border. It is not realistic, it is not reasonable, it is not a solution at all. This bill would increase the scope of those subject to mandatory immigration detention, including those in the U.S. under a lawful status, like Dreamers and TPS recipients, without allocating the additional resources necessary to carry out those detentions. To top it all off, it would also give states the ability to sue the administration if they don't comply with these new detention requirements. DHS already struggles to detain everyone the law says we're supposed to because of insufficient funding that Republicans refuse to fix. It is nearly impossible to expect the administration to uphold the new provisions in this bill if DHS doesn't have enough money to meet the current demands. Democrats have come to the table with real solutions on the border, real solutions on immigration, and instead all we get is garbage like this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Republicans now own this issue. Your side owns this. You own the border. You own the fentanyl crisis. You own all of it because you repeatedly reject any attempts, bipartisan attempts, to work together. And you care more about politics and politicizing this horrific crime than about actually doing anything to keep our country safe. So despite the very real domestic and global challenges facing our nation, House Republicans choose every day to waste our time on sham impeachments, silly censures, and extreme policies that will never, ever become law. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Patrick McHenry and Representative Sylvia Garcia from the Committee on Financial Services. Chairman McHenry, I would welcome your testimony.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be back before the Venerable Rules Committee. Thank you for your time on this beautiful afternoon. Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, it's a great opportunity to testify before this committee on H.R. 2799, the Expanding Access to Capital Act. We passed this in June of last year. We've had a little twists and turns of the legislative calendar, but honored to be here today and trying to get this bill to the floor. In 2012, a divided Congress, just like this Congress, with a Republican House, Democrat Senate, and a Democrat in the White House, passed the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, or JOBS Act, and President Obama signed it into law in April of that year. The JOBS Act started in the House Financial Services Committee. It addressed several key issues that prevented our capital markets from achieving their full potential. The JOBS Act right-sized overly burdensome regulatory barriers and provided new opportunities for entrepreneurs to access funding and grow their ideas into a business. Now, more than a decade later, we know that the JOBS Act was a success. Our economy is better off for it. However, in 2024, our securities laws remain imperfect. There's a lot of palaver involved in securities laws that make it unnecessarily onerous and complex. And there are common sense steps Congress can make to make this a simpler, easier process for innovators. These steps will continue to fuel economic growth through our financial markets if we take action as a Congress. I'm proud of the bipartisan legislation this House has already passed in 2023 to support capital formation, but our committee is far from finished. Fortunately, the House Financial Services Committee remains committed to finding both simple and innovative solutions to ensure U.S. capital markets remain the envy of the world. In this bill, the Expanding Access to Capital Act, we do just that. This bill is designed to address three key facets of our capital markets. It will strengthen our public markets, help small businesses and entrepreneurs, and create new opportunities for everyday investors to build wealth through our private markets. First, our public markets. This bill aims to reverse the dangerous decline in initial public offerings, or IPOs, in the United States. Some believe the best way to increase IPOs is to force companies to go public by eroding our private markets. However, Republicans remain committed to market incentives that make going public more attractive. We do this by reducing the burdens that force small firms to spend more time on compliance than on growth. This bill expands certain benefits created for emerging growth companies, or EGCs, that were created in the Jobs Act. And it's the Jobs Act's IPO on-ramp that has made a huge difference in our public markets over the last decade. The Jobs Act IPO on-ramp demonstrated that certain compliance burdens can be minimized or delayed without weakening investor protection. That's been proven out over the last decade. Expanding these benefits is a common-sense approach to improve U.S. public markets by extending the IPO on-ramp, which has already, like I said, had a proven track record of success. Second, this bill would democratize fundraising for small businesses and entrepreneurs across the country. Small businesses account for 99.9% of U.S. businesses, and Congress must be responsive to their needs. One of the main concerns we have heard from small business owners and the funds dedicated to supporting startups is the need to expand access to investment capital outside traditional financial centers. This bill accomplishes this goal by permitting venture funds to raise more money from more investors. This will give those funds and small businesses new opportunities to gain exposure to a vastly different group of investors. We shouldn't have venture investment only in Austin, Boston, and Silicon Valley. We should have it across the country, and that should be in every neighborhood in America, not just the most affluent in this country. And our legislation takes a big step to make that happen. Finally, H.R. 2799 creates new and innovative opportunities for everyday investors to save and build wealth through our private markets. Currently, the accredited investor definition locks most Americans out of private markets by reserving these investments, whose returns are often the highest in the marketplace, to those who are already extraordinarily wealthy. This legislation reforms the antiquated accredited investor definition, so wealth is no longer the primary measure of sophistication. This has been bipartisan work to build out this concept, and I'm glad it's a part of this legislation. U.S. capital markets are too important to neglect, and we must prioritize needed improvements for the benefit of both American entrepreneurs and everyday American investors. I'm proud of the bipartisan work Congress did a little over 10 years ago to pass the Jobs Act and strengthen our capital markets. I believe we can and should continue the Job Act's legacy of bolstering our capital markets, and I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 2799. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Representative Garcia, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here in strong opposition to H.R. 2799, which will significantly harm our capital markets by allowing companies to avoid legal obligations and sidestep critical transparency and accountability measures that protect the American people. It is a tale of bad decisions built for big business and bad actors. This bill would weaken protections for workers and expose our retirees to investment fraudsters while doing nothing to help small business access the capital they need to thrive. You see, companies, large and small, want to join U.S. capital markets because they can access trillions of dollars at the lowest cost of any market. Their success is due in large part to the trust investors place in the public securities market, a trust that is based on a robust disclosure regime that gives investors the information they need to make informed decisions. The key word here is informed. We've got numerous large companies that are now taking advantage of the system and using exemptions originally intended to help small companies more easily raise money. This has resulted in a significant expansion of the private securities market, which is riskier than the public market because there are fewer and in some cases no disclosures required. The bill would pour fuel on the fire by allowing even more large companies to evade SEC registration, moving our markets away from the robust public disclosure regime that historically made them successful. This would deprive working families, retirees, and investors of more and safer investment opportunities. H.R. 2799 also lets more hedge funds and private equity companies hide investments that threaten our U.S. national security, harm the American dream of home ownership, and make health care more expensive. Why should we place the life savings of working families at a greater risk for companies that have more money than God? The bill helps companies sneak around critical oversight and scrutiny by the SEC or other regulators by increasing the number of private funds that do not have to register with the SEC. Mr. Chairman, it gets worse because it doesn't stop with federal regulators. H.R. 2799 blocks state enforcement of securities laws. State securities regulators are on the front line. They investigate complaints of investor fraud and enforce state laws. These regulators help educate investors about their rights, and they help small businesses raise money while following the law. The bill would block these state regulators from doing all of that. This bill helps financial middlemen or women with conflicted interests sell high-risk, opaque, and illiquid investment opportunities to retail investors, yet another bad decision built for bad actors. Most retail investors don't have the necessary information to make informed investment decisions or to be in a financial position to bear the much higher probability of failure that comes with investing in risky private securities. The numbers don't lie. 9 out of 10 startups fail. And while investing in these types of businesses can be appropriate for venture capital and private equity firms, it could be disastrous for retail or less experienced investors. Lastly, but certainly not least, the bill preempts all state labor laws, prohibiting states from classifying gig workers as employees. This would deprive gig workers of bedrock state-based protections like minimum wage laws, work safety requirements, workers' comp, health benefits, and so much more. Mr. Chairman, make no mistake, H.R. 2799 is the perfect bill for fraudsters, private equity firms, and companies that want to evade state labor laws. It is a bill of bad decisions built for bad actors. That's why all Democratic members of the Financial Services Committee unanimously opposed this bill when it was marked up last year. It is also why this bill is opposed by investor advocates, state securities regulators, and Americans unions such as the Consumer Federation of America, Americans for Financial Reform, Public Citizen, the Council of Institutional Investors, Center for American Progress, the North American Securities Administrators Association, the FL-CIO, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the Communication Workers of America, SEIU, United Steel Workers, and the Transport Workers Union of America, to name just a few. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill, and I yield back. Thank you so much.
I thank the gentlelady for her testimony. The chair has no questions at this time, so I turn to my good friend, distinguished Vice Chair of the committee, Dr. Burgess, for any questions he might have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Chairman McHenry, I was here in 2012 when you did this the first time, and thanks to your excellent recitation in your testimony today, I have no questions, and I do want to associate myself with everything you said. Thanks for being here. I yield back.
Thank you. And now turn to my good friend, distinguished ranking member, for any questions he might have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the Statement of Administration Policy on H.R. 2799.
Without objection.
Strongly oppose it, and I thank both my friends for being here, and I have no questions.
Now go to my good friend from Kentucky for any questions he might have for the panel.
I just have a quick question about the accredited investor definition. How will this expand opportunities for people to invest in things like startups and whatnot?
So right now we have the the accredited investor standard says that based off of a wealth factor test, that means you're a sophisticated investor. That means nothing about, it actually says you're a sophisticated investor under securities regulation without knowing your level of sophistication. What we're doing is now opening opportunities for those that are sophisticated but not wealthy to invest in the private markets. What this would do is expand the opportunity for those that have some expertise to be engaged in those startup markets where we've had the highest level of growth of our full business sector or in the private markets. So it would give those investors the opportunity to invest because they are sophisticated. It's a new avenue. This is not a new idea. But instead of it being a wealth factor, it then gets into whether or not you actually know something about what you're investing in or know something about investing. There's a period of time that we would have a chair of the Federal Reserve not qualify as an accredited investor under the Securities and Exchange Commission definition because they were not independently wealthy. That's an absurd and I would dare say dumb standard for us to have. And I know that the gentleman has been engaged in intellectual property and development of intellectual property and gone from being sophisticated in the subject matter that he's working on, but not qualified under the securities regulation. And so we want expertise to be the driver here, which I do think is better for consumer protection and investor protection in a significant way.
It probably is the case that I don't qualify as a sophisticated enough investor to invest in a technology startup, even though I've started one. And even though I have 30 patents in the field, I would not qualify under today's standards, most likely, because like you said, they're based on your wealth. And I always thought this, if there's one single reason to support this bill, this may be the best reason for me. And I think it's actually not a Republican versus Democrat thing, because what you're doing is you are allowing people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale to invest in these opportunities that heretofore only multimillionaires could invest in. You know, when I had my invention in college and started a company right in college, we went to the venture capital market. And then as it was taking off and doing fairly well, I had some friends who wanted to invest. And I had to tell them, I'm sorry, you're not a sophisticated enough investor under the rules. Even though this wasn't a company that we were going public with, we were offering an opportunity to invest in. Now, it's a high-risk investment. This is true. You're just as likely to lose everything as you are to get a 2x return. And generally, in these, I'm not saying in everybody's startup company, but across the field in tech companies, they are risky investments. But I always found it very unfair. As somebody who is middle class, you know, has all their bills paid, doesn't have a lot of debt, and is looking to invest, they're considered not sophisticated enough to invest in one of these tech startups, but they can go buy a lottery ticket, right? Like, that is what we tell the people who don't have a lot of money in the bank. Go buy a lottery ticket. Maybe that'll work out for you. You know, the lottery tickets are a tax on people who can't do math, okay? Whereas these investments in these tech startups, I think, and other startups, they don't have to be tech, but startups, I think it'll be good for not just the companies that are trying to get off the ground, but for the people, as long as they understand the risk, and that there is high risk, for them to make the kind of multiple returns on their money that these investment banks make, right? So I applaud you for making that part of the bill, and I'm glad to see that you're doing that, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you. In reviewing this, I guess about the only thing that's remarkable about this bill is how misleading its title is. It's called the Expanding Access to Capital Act, but it doesn't expand access at all. It's a regulatory handout for private equity and hedge funds and billionaires, and it looks likely to increase financial fraud in the United States. It'll make it easier for CD advisors and fund managers to take advantage of investors and retirees and seniors. It throws them under the bus and makes them more vulnerable to fraud by removing transparency. If people are worried about being scammed, they're going to be less willing to lend out their savings. That hurts investment, growth, and does not increase access to capital. It also hurts job creation. You know, I think we should have learned by now that that Americans do not prosper when we turn financial markets into the Wild West. And regular people trying to save for retirement or their kids' education, they're going to pay the price if this bill becomes law. Seniors will pay the price. Ms. Garcia, we've heard some talking points about this bill. My impression is the bill is going to lead to more fraud, but can you tell us what this bill would do to the average person looking to save for retirement?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think it could lead to more fraud. And this bill enables conflicted financial intermediaries to sell or market high-risk securities to retail investors, including seniors, without providing them information about the company that's paying the broker to sell the unregistered securities. So this is a recipe for fraud, and I think it could hurt not only seniors but retirees. It would really be anybody who looks at perhaps an opportunity to invest and do more than the lottery ticket that Mr. Massey was talking about. But you know, it's high risk, and they don't have all the information. So obviously, it's going to end up in failure. So you're correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Mr. McHenry, I appreciate you bringing this to through the Financial Services Committee, and you know, it really is amazing that you hear the word fraud, you hear the word taking advantage of I guess, the taxpayers. Where is fraud? You're dealing with sophisticated investors by increasing the capital markets from 50 million to I think 150. How is this bad for the economy? I'm from South Carolina. We see the more license plates with New York, California, New Jersey, who are fleeing high taxes and mismanagement by liberal politicians who really don't know that much, have never created a business to be able to comment on this. Tell me how this is bad. How does fraud get into this?
No, I mean, these are, I appreciate the accusations, but this is what they said about the Jobs Act that got a, almost near unanimous vote coming out of the House. It's what they said about every change to securities law. This is the same talking points I've heard for my 20 years on the House Financial Services Committee. What we're talking about here is updating certain thresholds based off inflation, which we've experienced a massive amount of inflation as a result of our Democrat colleagues' policies. But in giving one example, this is changing just one provision that's not been updated since 1940 to adjust it for inflation. So these are not revolutionary changes, I'm sorry to say to Mr. Massey, but what we worked on, as you know, on committee, and you worked very well and very importantly on this package and the corporate governance package that we also passed out of committee, that these are necessary changes so that we remain the envy of the world, that people want to put their money at work here in the United States in the U.S. capital markets, which means we have the most affordable credit in the world. We have the deepest, most liquid markets in the world and the envy of the world. Now, it's not the revolutionary stuff that my colleague is saying here and the accusations she's saying. These are modest changes, but important changes so you can allow individual investors more opportunities to invest in small businesses new investment opportunities, and savers to access the best upside in the whole world and change what was a dumb standard, which is the accredited investor standard we currently have. There's a wealth test, not a sophistication test, and actually allow people to test in for those that know something about investing and know the risks involved. This is not opening it up, as my colleague said, to seniors to be taken advantage of. It's allowing seniors that may not have substantial wealth to show that they do know what the heck they're doing with their own money. And that here is the core. Who gets to control your money? Is it you and your decision-making? Or is it the government and members of Congress or the Securities and Exchange Commission? I think it should be you in the driver's seat. And we want to make sure there are proper disclosures so you can be informed and make good decisions and have the information you need so you can make good decisions. And that's what we try to do. And this is a modest set of changes, but important things so that we stay at the top of our game here in the United States.
And anybody that's ever read a prospectus knows these people know what they're doing. They specialize in whatever they're trying to raise capital for. I was with an IT guy that wants to expand in South Carolina. Guess what he was talking about? Access to capital. And this, I really can't fathom the arguments against this at any measure. Now, when you made a good point, when you compare it to, would you rather the government, I guess, tell us how to spend our money? What's been the track record of government? It's been pretty dismal. So, and for those who don't want to invest abroad in mutual funds or the stock market, that want a individual business that they know something about, this is a real treasure. Thank you for spearheading this, and thank you for putting this before us. No further questions. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and nice to be back in the committee room. And thank you, Chair and Representative Garcia, for presenting this bill. I think what strikes me is that I keep hearing things that just don't ring true with the facts on the ground. And that is that we know that under the Biden administration, with policies that Democrats championed and passed last Congress, we actually have more small businesses opening and operating and thriving than ever before. I am very concerned about what happens in the Latino community, and more small Latino businesses opened than ever before. So it's pretty darn exciting. And access to capital is something that I care a lot about, Chairman. It's something I worked on before I came to Congress. So it was a very big effort of mine, because you cannot grow. You cannot grow your economy. You cannot invest in whether it be Head Start or healthcare or a business if you don't have access to capital. So I think that is a very important thing, and I recognize the importance. But what strikes me is that this bill seems to be showing is that the Republicans' priority stands with private equity and not with transparency, and that there is a risk when you are not transparent. And transparency is very important to lower the risk of investments. So instead of helping everyday investors, it seems to side with hedge funds and expanding private equity. And, we have problems with private equity around our country. In Santa Fe, I would say we have private equity firms that are buying up apartment complexes and raising rents. Just this weekend, an elderly gentlewoman came and shared with me that she was moving out of the complex that she had lived in for years, because private equity came in and her rent went from, around $1,400, $1,375 to $2,400, right? And the private equity firm did nothing to improve that that complex. Mr. Chair, I'd like unanimous consent to enter into the record when private equity becomes your landlord.
Without objection.
And, the headline, I'd encourage everybody to read this, because it's sort of like, who are you standing with? Who are you working to support and protect? And, when private equity becomes your landlord, amid a national housing crisis, giant private equity firms have been buying up apartment buildings en masse to squeeze them for profit. Meanwhile, tenants say they're the ones paying the price. And it's not just rental properties. We know that private equity has also squeezed out home ownership across the country. So those are the kinds of bills that would be wonderful to see, where we're actually working on making sure that we have more home ownership, more bringing down the cost of rent. We also heard that it was Democrat policies that led to inflation. I'm sorry. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, look at what it did to gas prices. Look at what it did there. And I've already entered into, Mr. Chairman, I won't enter it in again, but the Kansas Federal Reserve report, which showed that 60% of inflation was pure profits, so greed. So who are you going to be standing with? And that's, I think, the question that this bill raises once again. Who are you standing with? And, you know, private equity can do a lot of great things, but we want to make sure we know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Representative Garcia, a question was asked of the chair. What does fraud come into this? Why don't you explain why there is that concern and why we keep raising that point?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. It's all about transparency. It's about knowing that who you're dealing with, and especially this bill when it does away with any state regulatory laws, when it does away with state labor laws. That means that anybody could be doing whatever they want to without any disclosures, really, in the state. And when you look at why the SEC was founded, why FDR created it, was to prevent this. It seems like this is just a step back. And you're absolutely right about private equity. We don't know sometimes who owns the companies, whether they're foreign or domestic. And they are just taking over a lot of neighborhoods. I know that's happening in Houston. Not only are they taking over the neighborhoods, they're buying properties at a higher price, raising appraisal values, which means people are not able to pay their taxes because their home values go up. According to a study by the Business Insider during the third quarter of 2023, private equity firms accounted for a staggering 44% of the purchases of single-family homes. 44%. I mean, that's taken the American dream from a lot of people. And again, we don't know who's behind those private equity firms. You know it. You're a lawyer like I am. You know, you can form one corporation that buys under another corporation and under another corporation. So according to another report by ProPublica, private equity firms were behind 85% of Freddie Mac's biggest apartment complex deals in the last 10 years. So how is that really helping the average consumer, the average investor? It's not. This is all about helping Wall Street get even richer. It's about, allowing private equity firms to have even more dollars in their pockets. So thank you for the question, and I think you hit it on the notes. It's really all about transparency and disclosures.
Yeah. Right, and the reason the SEC was created, thank you for reminding us, it's because there was no regulation.
No regulation.
Right? No regulation. It led to the Depression. Mm-hmm. And so regulation has a role, making sure that people are aware of, it has a very important role. And it's not just the apartment complex. Thank you for raising that. It's also single-family housing. Mr. Chair, I'd seek unanimous consent to enter into the record. Wall Street has purchased hundreds of thousands of single-family homes since the Great Recession.
Without objection.
And once again, this just goes to the fact that this is a small aspect of a problem. Would love it if we were actually addressing things Americans want us to, which includes the affordable housing crisis. And with that, is there anything else you'd like to add, Representative?
No, I just thank you for crystallizing and putting right at the points about transparency. It's about regulation. It's about making sure that people do have, someone there to protect their interests.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Chairman, at the end of the day, is there anything additional you'd like to add about this legislation?
Well, look, securities laws, the federal securities laws sit atop state securities laws. And states have wide authorities that they have preserved under the Constitution. And to say that, on one hand, that there is no regulation at the state level, I think every state securities administrator would beg to differ. Every state attorney general would beg to differ. So what we're doing is an important piece of reforming the federal piece of this to make sure that we have the deepest, most liquid capital markets in the world, in the envy of the world. We've done that with orderly markets, with consumer protection, investor protection, but we need to focus on the capital formation piece because today we have fewer public companies in America than we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. That's not in the interest of investor protection. And when they talk about private capital coming into this space, well, it's because we've made it so difficult to use public capital, public markets capital, to address these concerns. This bill takes an important step to clean up the public markets, so we have more companies available in the public markets for people to invest in. That is good for America. That is long-term good for our economic system of capitalism, and is good for the average American to have the alignment with economic growth and the innovation that's happening in our economy. We've got to keep pace. And the Securities Exchange Commission has not kept pace with this change. Congress needs to be the driver of this to make sure we have that balance between investor protection, capital formation, and that's what we've done with this bill. I think it's an important, good step for small businesses and for mom and pop investors who want to own a piece of America and a piece of a growing economy.
Thank you, Chairman. This legislation is about more financial tools in the toolbox for the American people in an economy racked with inflation. Thanks to this administration's ruinous policies, middle-class Americans, small-time investors, and small businesses, they need all the tools that possible. I strongly support this common-sense step to clear away the clutter of unnecessary disclosures and burdensome mandates that are getting in the way of greater economic opportunities for all Americans. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman very much. Are there any additional questions for our panel? Hearing none, I want to thank both of you for appearing before us today and for your testimony and answering our questions. And with that, the witnesses are excused.